Postmodern Condition by Jean-Francois Lyotard. 12. Education and its legitimation through performativity. It should be easy to describe how the other facet of knowledge, its transmission or education, is affected by the predominance of the performativity criterion. If we accept the notion that there is an established body of knowledge, the question of its transmission, from a pragmatic point of view, can be subdivided into a series of questions. Who transmits learning? What is transmitted? To whom? Through what medium? In what form? With what effect? A university policy is formed by a coherent set of answers to these questions. If the performativity of the supposed social system is taken as the criterion of relevance, higher education becomes a subsystem of the social system, and the same performativity criterion is applied to each of these problems. The desired goal becomes the optimal contribution of higher education to the best performativity of the social system. Accordingly, it will have to create the skills that are indispensable to that system. These are of two kinds. The first kind are more specifically designed to tackle world competition. They vary according to which specialities the nation states or major educational institutions can sell on the world market. If our general hypothesis is correct, there will be a growth in demand for experts and high and middle management executives in the leading sectors mentioned at the beginning of this study, which is where the action will be in the years to come. Any discipline with applicability to training in telematics will most likely receive priority in education. All the more so since an increase in the number of these experts should speed the research in other learning sectors, as has been the case with medicine and biology. Secondly, and still within the same general hypothesis, higher learning will have to continue to supply the social system with the skills fulfilling society's own needs, which center on maintaining its internal cohesion. Previously, this task entailed the formation and dissemination of a general model of life, most often legitimated by the emancipation narrative. In the context of delegitimation, universities and the institutions of higher learning are called upon to create skills and no longer ideals. So many doctors, so many teachers in a given discipline, so many engineers, so many administrators, etc. The transmission of knowledge is no longer designed to train an elite capable of guiding the nation towards its emancipation, but to supply the system with players capable of acceptably fulfilling their roles at the pragmatic posts required by its institutions. If the ends of higher learning are functional, what of its addressees? The student has changed already and will certainly change more. They are no longer a youth from the liberal elite, more or less concerned with the great task of social progress, understood in terms of emancipation. In this sense, the democratic university, which was modeled along the principles of emancipationist humanism, today seems to offer little in the way of performance. Higher education is in fact already undergoing a major realignment dictated both by administrative measures and by social demands emanating from the new users. The tendency is to divide the functions of higher learning into two broad categories of services. In its function of professional training, higher education still addresses itself to the young of the liberal elite, to whom it transmits the competence judged necessary by each profession. They are joined through one route or another by the addressees of the new domains of knowledge linked to the new techniques and technologies. They are, once again, young people who have yet to become active. Aside from these two categories of students, who reproduce the professional intelligentsia and the technical intelligentsia, the remainder of the young people present in the universities are for the most part unemployed, who are not counted as job seekers in the statistics, though they outnumber the openings in their disciplines. Despite their age, they do in fact belong to the new category of the addressees of knowledge. For in addition to its professionalist function, the university is beginning, or should begin, to play a new role in improving the system's performance, that of job retraining and continuing education. Outside the universities, departments, or institutions with a professional orientation, knowledge will no longer be transmitted en bloc, once and for all, to young people before their entry into the workforce. Rather, it is and will be served à la carte to adults who are either already working or expect to be for the purpose of improving their skills and chances of promotion, but also to help them acquire information, languages, and language games, allowing them both to widen their occupational horizons and to articulate their technical and ethical experience. The new course that the transmission of knowledge is taking is not without conflict, as much as it is in the interests of the system, and therefore of its decision makers, to encourage professional advancement, since it can only improve the performance of the whole. Any experimentation in discourse, institutions, and values is regarded as having little or no operational value, and is not given the slightest credence in the name of the seriousness of the system. Such experimentation offers an escape from functionalism. It should not be dismissed lightly, since it was functionalism itself that pointed the way. But it is safe to assume that responsibility for it will devolve upon extra-university networks. In any case, even if the performativity principle does not always help pinpoint the policy to follow, its general effect is to subordinate the institutions of higher learning to the existing powers. The moment knowledge ceases to be an end in itself, the realization of the idea or the emancipation of men, its transmission is no longer the exclusive responsibility of scholars and students. The notion of university franchise now belongs to a bygone era. The autonomy granted the universities after the crisis of the late 1960s has very little meaning, given the fact that practically nowhere do teachers' groups have the power to decide what the budget of their institution will be. All they can do is allocate the funds that are assigned to them, and only then as the last step in the process. What is transmitted in higher learning? In the case of professional training and limiting ourselves to a narrowly functionalist point of view, an organized stock of established knowledge is the essential thing that is transmitted. The application of new technologies to this stock may have a considerable impact on the medium of communication. It does not seem absolutely necessary that the medium be a lecture delivered in person by a teacher in front of silent students, with questions reserved for sections or practical work sessions run by an assistant. To the extent that learning is translatable into computer language and the traditional teacher is replaceable by memory banks, didactics can be entrusted to machines linking traditional memory banks and computer data banks to intelligent terminals placed at the student's disposal. Pedagogy would not necessarily suffer. The students would still have to be taught something, not contents, but how to use the terminals. On the one hand, that means teaching new languages, and on the other, a more refined ability to handle the language game of interrogation. Where should the question be addressed? In other words, what is the relevant memory bank for what needs to be known? How should the question be formulated to avoid misunderstandings? From this point of view, elementary training in informatics and especially telematics should be a basic requirement in universities, in the same way that fluency in a foreign language is now, for example. It is only in the context of the grand narratives of legitimation, the life of the spirit and/or the emancipation of humanity, that the partial replacement of teachers by machines may seem inadequate or even intolerable. But it is probable that these narratives are already no longer the principal driving force behind interest in acquiring knowledge. If the motivation is power, then this aspect of classical didactics ceases to be relevant. The question now asked by the professionalist student, the state, or institutions of higher education, is no longer, is it true, but what use is it? In the context of the mercantilization of knowledge, more often than not, this question is equivalent to, is it saleable? And in the context of power growth, is it efficient? Having competence in a performance-oriented skill does indeed seem saleable in the conditions described above, and it is efficient by definition. What no longer makes the grade is competence as defined by other criteria, true, false, just, unjust, etc., and of course, low performativity in general. This creates the prospect for a vast market for competence and operational skills. Those who possess this kind of knowledge will be the object of offers or even seduction policies. Seen in this light, what we are approaching is not the end of knowledge, quite the contrary. Data banks are the encyclopedia of tomorrow. They transcend the capacity of each of their users. They are nature for postmodern man. It should be noted, however, that didactics does not simply consist in the transmission of information. Incompetence, even when defined as a performance skill, does not simply reduce to having a good memory for data or having easy access to a computer. It is a commonplace that what is of utmost importance is the capacity to actualize the relevant data for solving a problem here and now, and to organize that data into an efficient strategy. As long as the game is not a game of perfect information, the advantage will be with the player who has knowledge and can obtain information. By definition, this is the case with a student in a learning situation. But in games of perfect information, performativity cannot consist in obtaining additional information in this way. It comes rather from arranging the data in a new way, which is what constitutes a move, properly speaking. This new arrangement is usually achieved by connecting together series of data that were previously held to be independent. This capacity to articulate what used to be separate can be called imagination. Speed is one of its properties. It is possible to conceive the world of postmodern knowledge as governed by a game of perfect information, in the sense that the data is in principle accessible to any expert. There is no scientific secret. Given equal competence, what extra performativity depends on, in the final analysis, is imagination, which allows one either to make a new move or change the rules of the game. If education must not only provide for the reproduction of skills, but also for their progress, then it follows that the transmission of knowledge should not be limited to the transmission of information, but should include training in all of the procedures that can increase one's ability to connect the fields jealously guarded from one another by the traditional organization of knowledge. The slogan of interdisciplinary studies, which became particularly popular after the crisis of 1968, but was being advocated long before that, seems to move in this direction. It ran up against the feudalism of the universities, they say. It ran up against more than that. In Humboldt's model of the university, each science has its own place in a system crowned by speculation. Any encroachment of one science into another's field can only create confusion, noise in the system. Collaboration can only take place on the level of speculation in the heads of the philosophers. The idea of an interdisciplinary approach is specific to the age of delegitimation in its hurried empiricism. The relation to knowledge is not articulated in terms of the realization of the life, of the spirit, or the emancipation of humanity, but in terms of the users of a complex conceptual and material machinery and those who benefit from its performance capabilities. They have at their disposal no meta-language or meta-narrative in which to formulate the final goal and correct use of that machinery. But they do have brainstorming to improve its performance. The emphasis placed on teamwork is related to the predominance of the performativity criterion in knowledge. When it comes to speaking the truth or prescribing justice, numbers are meaningless. They only make a difference if justice and truth are thought of in terms of the probability of success. In general, teamwork does in fact improve performance, if it is done under certain conditions detailed long ago by social scientists. In particular, it has been established that teamwork is especially successful in improving performativity within the framework of a given model, that is, for the implementation of a task. Its advantages seem less certain when the need is to imagine new models. In other words, on the level of their conception. There have apparently been cases where even this has worked, but it is difficult to isolate what is attributable to the team setup and what derived from the individual talent of the team members. It will be observed that this orientation is concerned more with the production of knowledge, research, than its transmission. To separate them completely is to fall into abstraction and is probably counterproductive even within the framework of functionalism and professionalism. And yet the solution toward which the institutions of knowledge all over the world are in fact moving consists in dissociating these two aspects of didactics, simple reproduction and extended reproduction. This is being done by earmarking entities of all kinds, institutions, levels, or programs within institutions, groupings of institutions, groupings of disciplines, either for the selection and reproduction of professional skills, or for the promotion and stimulation of imaginative minds. The transmission channels to which the first category is given access can be simplified and made available on a mass scale. The second category has the privilege of working on a smaller scale in conditions of aristocratic egalitarianism. It matters little whether the latter are officially a part of the universities. But one thing seems certain is that in both cases, the process of delegitimation and the predominance of the performance criterion are sounding the knell of the age of the professor. A professor is no more competent than memory bank networks in transmitting established knowledge, no more competent than interdisciplinary teams in imagining new moves or new games.